If our film were to be described in terms of genre, it would be a bricolage like most short films, but the conventions that it does use from genres generally derive from both the comedy and fantasy genres. Typical conventions of the comedy genre include Typical conventions of the fantasy genre include Although, like most short films, ours is a hybrid subgenre, which is both comedy and fantasy, and it also uses the conventions of multiple other genres in addition. It does represent specific conventions from these genres. This is what makes the content of our film recognizable to the audience, because they are able to identify character types and plot patterns based on experiences with previous media texts. A convention that our short film uses that derives from the comedy genre is the idiotic character type. This is a very stereotypical character type when it comes to comedies. This character is often stupid or accident prone. The protagonist of our film is not necessarily stupid. In fact, it could be argued that this character type is challenged within our film, because he wears a suit and appears to have a seemingly professional and serious job in an office. However, at the plot's climax, his hands disappear, and he doesn't seem very intelligent whilst he attempts and fails to open the door to his office. It is clear that there are different ways of looking at it, but as his hands disappearing is the bulk of the story, I would say that this is a convention that is used within our film. Another convention deriving from the comedy genre that our film uses is the subgenre slapstick. This specific type of comedy is very exaggerated, and the humour of it depends on impossible and humorous situations. Of course, the protagonist's hands disappearing in our film is an extremely exaggerated and impossible situation. Another convention of slapstick comedy that is a crucial aspect of our film is the idea that slapstick is usually visual and almost silent in terms of dialogue. We incorporated the narrative technique of visual storytelling into our film. When I say this, I am referring to the aspects of our film that don't involve any dialogue from the protagonist, and his actions are telling the audience what is happening, which is most of the time during our film. We did this with the purpose of creating a resemblance between our film and the short film The Black Hole, as it influenced us so strongly. This turned out to be a very effective technique for our film, and it seemed to be more humorous overall, as indicated by our audience's reactions. The entire narrative of The Black Hole is visually told through the protagonist's actions, expressions, body language, and surrounding elements. Our short film develops conventions of real media text by taking that fantasy element of the story and taking it away from a more typical fantasy setting, like a medieval setting, for example. We instead based our film as in a present-day office. This subverts the idea of a fantasy world and mythical land that we usually expect from a fantasy film, and instead brings it to a modern-day one. The reason that this is a developed convention is that it takes a magical aspect that is expected from a fantasy and takes it away from the setting that is expected and modernizes that setting. Another convention that is developed within our film is the character type of a smart person, who is often socially awkward. As I have already mentioned, our protagonist wears a suit and works in an office, which indicates that he is intelligent to some degree. He is also not at any point interactive with any other character, which could indicate that he is somewhat socially awkward. The way in which this is developed is by the fact that he is also portrayed as stupid or incapable. This evolves and combines the stereotypical character type of a comedy. A convention that our film challenges is a convention from the slapstick subgenre. For the beginning of our film, very monotone and thriller-esque music is used, as well as dark lighting, which is another thing we took from The Black Hole. The tone of The Black Hole is quite dark and unlike typical slapstick. This aspect of our film completely subverts conventions of slapstick comedy, because They are typically brightly lit and have upbeat music. Another convention that our short film challenges from real media products would be the fantasy aspect, because fantasy films are typically magical or dreamlike or revolve around mythical creatures. Our film follows a protagonist that, by all appearances, seems entirely normal up until his hands unexplainably disappear. This is our unique selling point that challenges what is expected from a comedy short film. Our target audience, after researching demographics and psychographics, fell generally into categories of younger people, more specifically the psychographic groups of aspirers, explorers, and strugglers, because they are mostly younger people, which means that they would relate better to the style and modernness of our film and ancillaries, as well as better understand and relate to the humour. More specifically, explorers, because they are all about experience and adventure, and fantasy films are typically full of adventure. Also, strugglers, because they are known to seek escape, which would suggest that they would be drawn to a comedy because it is light-hearted and not serious. They may also be drawn to fantasies because they are not representative of real life and contain magical elements, which very easily takes the viewer's mind to that constructed world and that world's problems rather than their own. This research into our specific audience types meant that our short film and ancillary text had to be tailored to fit our understanding of our audience's needs. Our short film is mostly built upon the conventions of the comedy and fantasy genres, which in itself appeals to a younger audience and the three psychographic groups I have just mentioned. Specific aspects within our main product that attract this audience include our unique selling point of the protagonist's hands disappearing, visual storytelling, and slapstick comedy. Some of the protagonist's qualities help appeal to this audience also. Just to name a few, he is seemingly intelligent at first, yet later stupid and incapable, accident-prone, and fails to perform a simple task due to an impossible situation. During post-production and the creation of my ancillary texts, I researched design conventions of posters and magazines, and I looked at these for both feature-length and short films, as well as genre-specific films. I found that generally posters had the same conventions for both short films and feature-lengths, and so did magazine reviews. However, genre and subgenre specific posters such as Oscar's Hotel and The Tea Chronicles had design aspects that were seemingly unique to the comedy genre. I found that similar short films such as Oscar's Hotel used bright colours, large bold sans serif text, and lots of imagery, as did the Tea Chronicles poster. However, this poster is a lot more dramatic and it is also illustrated rather than a realistic looking image. The style of this poster is not what I wanted to model my poster after, because I think that it would not represent the style of our film very well, because a lot of our film, in terms of narrative techniques and mise en scène, is influenced by The Black Hole, which has a more dark and serious tone. Although the narrative itself is not that serious, it still gives that impression, as does our film to begin with, and with both, the climactic plot point is more serious. With this in mind, it was important that my poster fit this impression also and did not give too much away. I have done this by using a photo instead of illustration and edited it in black and white to convey a serious tone whilst only using colour to highlight relevant text and key props such as the water bottle. I used similar text styles and the colours blue and yellow as a recurring theme because they best represented our film, especially blue because one of the main narrative aspects of our film is water. With my magazine review, I used Little White Lies as my influence. A magazine like Empire uses too much visual detail for what I wanted and so would give away too much, when I felt that it was crucial for our unique selling point to be surprising to the audience. I like that their style is consistent but also flexible and creative. Their film reviews are mostly structured in the same way, in regards to placement of text and images. So this style of design again didn't give too much away, but also allowed me a little bit of design freedom so that I could incorporate those key colours, blue and yellow, to highlight certain aspects. As a whole, my three end products complement each other well and represent the content of our film effectively. The feedback we were given after pitching our initial ideas taught us to not get carried away and to keep our ideas grounded. This was useful advice because of our unique selling point being the protagonist's hands disappearing. We were also told that, besides the hands disappearing, we didn't have enough story outside of that aspect for it to be a full short film.
For the first idea, I don't think there's enough for it to be a short film. I think unless you've got other ideas that you haven't said, it's going to be very repetitive and not in a harsh way, but boring if you don't add anything else to it.
We responded to this by including montages to speed up the more dull and repetitive scenes. And we also added in the protagonist making comical attempts at opening the door without his hands. Our feedback from the screening provided us with post-production feedback that we were able to apply in retrospect. Some valid feedback was gained from our questionnaires, one in particular that had additional notes as well as tick box answers to each question said that there was a bit too much of him typing at the beginning and the hands were edited out well in some shots. In response to this, we made editing corrections to the scenes where the hands weren't edited out fully, or as well as in others, and we also worked on the scenes that were more repetitive and less entertaining, including the scenes of him typing. The software Celtex was used for the construction of our script. This software allowed us to easily convert the ideas from our pitch and short story into an effective screenplay. Celtex is a much more suitable software than Microsoft Word, for example, because it automatically puts your script into the appropriate format. This was extremely useful to me because it helped me to understand and grasp script writing as a whole. Without it, I would have struggled to format the script correctly and appropriately. Another software that I had used more frequently during the construction, research and planning stages was Adobe Photoshop. I used Photoshop to edit images, some for posts on my blog for research and planning purposes. For example, my post on genre theory was created in Photoshop. Others include those that I use for my poster and magazine review. I also used Photoshop to create our production logo. I used Photoshop so much because it is very efficient and easy to use. It also has so much variety of uses, so the flexibility of it allowed me to have a lot of creative freedom and technical freedom as well. In fact, I would say that I didn't use Photoshop enough, and I could have and should have used it much more to create more interesting posts for my blog. I could have used Photoshop to create my magazine review as well, but instead I used Adobe InDesign because it is tailored more specifically to designing a magazine review. Much like how Celtex is specifically tailored to formatting a script. I had never used InDesign before, but it wasn't difficult at all to use or get used to. Specific features such as placeholders for text and images allowed me to immediately organize the layout I wanted for my double-page spread, before I had even prepared any images or text. Another tool that I had found to be very useful was the Fill with Placeholder text tool, because it gave me an idea of how much text I would need to fill the text placeholders I had made for my layout. It also helped me to see how the layout looked more clearly, because I could tell if I had too much content or not enough content in terms of text aspects. For the construction of our short film itself, the most noteworthy media technologies that we used include a 700D Canon camera, a boom pole for sound recording, and the Adobe software Premiere Pro for the editing process. The 700D Canon was a significant improvement from the less advanced cameras that we used last year. The Canon 700D has an autofocus system that made filming tracking shots or just scenes where our protagonist was moving frantically, like when he is chaotically attempting to open the door, much easier to capture. This and the 1080p resolution allowed us to create a film with higher quality footage and overall a much more professional looking product in comparison to the products we created last year, like our prelim and film opening using the Panasonic HC V700 camcorders. The use of a boom mic to record the diegetic sounds of our film made a substantial difference in sound quality and made it so that we had little to no sound issues in the editing process. The reason that the boom mic made such a difference is that it can reach much closer to the scene and therefore better record the sound whilst filming. This was an extremely useful media technology to use because of the fact that we didn't have the difficult task of trying to correct sound issues later on. It saved us a lot of time and helped make the editing process a lot smoother. We used Premiere Pro for editing. This was useful because editing allowed us to convey specific conventions to the audience, and we made them recognizable through the editing techniques. One important aspect of our film in relation to editing is the short beginning portion that we edited in black and white and used monotone music to create a thriller feel, in order to create more surprise later on when the music is changed to more upbeat music and is more similar to a comedy. And the black and white is changed to colour. Again, this is more related to comedy conventions. Another vital editing aspect of our film is the montages of quick cutting. This was important and extremely effective at reducing the repetitiveness of him doing work.